All right, everybody, welcome to our meetup. And Nick is going to be our guest speaker for today. So, Nick, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and get started whenever you're ready?
Sure thing. Thank you so much for having me, Callie. It's great to be with you guys. Yeah, my name's Nick Cosentino. I am a principal software engineering manager at Microsoft. I've been at Microsoft for just under 4 years now, and I've been doing a lot of stuff before that in the digital forensics space at a startup. They got to go from a very small size, about 8 people, to approximately like 250 to 300 by the time I left. So, got to do a bunch of startup stuff and do big tech as well. So, what I'm going to be talking about today is sort of this is going to be obviously every time we have discussions about things, there's going to be bias. This will have some of my bias, of course, from my own experiences, but I wanted to be able to elaborate about some of the differences that I've seen in big tech versus startup and things like that. And especially for people that are looking for jobs. And I think I don't want to say, I'm not trying to like persuade you to go one way or the other. That's one thing I want to call out in the beginning. It's not a matter of like, this is clearly the better way or the worse way. It's really just things to think about.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
the other part that I wanted to mention with that is that I might say things like, "Hey, I notice in big tech we see X." It doesn't mean that in startups you won't see that. And I want to call that out in the beginning that I'm not trying to like I have to kind of generalize to talk about these things, but it's not a rule. I don't really if you see things that I post online, I don't like talking about absolutes because there's always exceptions to things. And that's very much the case as I go to talk through this. So does that sound like a good plan?
Sounds great. Do you like
Awesome.
questions while you're talking or do you like questions at the end?
I'm totally fine if people and I don't I'm a Microsoft employee, I use Teams all the time. Is there like a hand up kind of thing in Zoom that people can
Yeah,
uh cool. Can someone put their hand up so I can see what it looks like? And that way I know what to look out for?
sure.
Okay, cool.
I
There's
will
a
note I tend to interrupt the
oh,
speaker
that's
with
totally cool
questions because
too.
I get too excited. So I probably won't put my hand up, but everyone else, do as you're
No,
told.
that's I was going to say too, if you guys are used to talking through things and like just interrupting, I tell people internally when I'm doing meetings, like literally just cut me off. I'm not going to be offended. The only reason I wasn't suggesting that here is because I don't know how you guys like to kind of chat through stuff together. But if that's how you guys like to rock and roll, I'm totally cool with that. I would much rather it be contextual and you're not like, hey, remember 20 minutes ago you said this thing? And I'll be like, no, I don't remember anything
Sorry, Nick.
from five
Sorry,
minutes
Nick.
ago.
Can you see my emoji?
I can, yes.
Okay, cool, cool. Just want to test.
He has no idea what he's signing up for with this Callie. Oh no. Okay, well, awesome. Yeah. So with that said, definitely feel free to interrupt me, and I'm gonna kind of walk you through. I'm gonna use the way that I want to frame this is I'll use some of my own experience to talk about sort of where I'm currently at Microsoft, which is big tech, and the startup I was at just prior to this, which got to see that transition not into big tech, of course, but into a larger company. Okay. So to start things off, I would say that when we're considering things like startups versus larger companies, one of the things that a lot of people think about is like just call it like job security. And I wanted to start with this one because I think if we're looking at the tech landscape right now, people would say, well, what job security? And that's one of the points I want to get across is I think for a long time, people look at the bigger companies and they go, well, I mean, that seems way more safe. If, as long as I land a job there, like I will be employable forever. I never have to worry. It's cushy, whatever. Like I don't know what everyone thinks, of course, but I think that's a generalization that it's just safe to land a job at these bigger places. Now, if we look at startups, there is inherent risk to that, right? Startup in general, you are at a company that has not yet like necessarily got its legs under it to go walk to run, so to speak. And there's a lot more risk just in like, have we proven this business? Are we sustainable? Do we need investment? There's so much going on at a startup that is just more risky because of the nature of what's going on. So when you look at those things only, it makes it very much seem like, hey, like, yeah, of course, startups are going to be riskier. But as we see with the job market, especially over the last few years, right, with big tech layoffs and stuff like that, you'll hear people or see it posted on LinkedIn and places like that. People that have been employed for 20 plus years at places and they're let go, right? So
Uh-oh. Is it me or is it
Uh-oh.
Nick?
when it
No,
comes to
I think it's
job
Nick.
security, well, sorry, what happened? Did I
You
freeze?
broke out. You broke out.
Oh no, am I back now?
You are,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Excellent. Okay, sorry. I don't know how much I broke up there, but what I was getting to was that if you're considering things like job security in terms of like maybe where you want to head, I would maybe reframe things a little bit. And it's not, hey, let me go to a big company, therefore I can, it's a cushy job. But really, it's more about I would just consider the state of a startup if you're thinking about a startup and just looking at whether or not you feel comfortable with where it's at in terms of finances and things like that. Right. So if it's such an early phase startup where it's like, you know, a couple people and they're like, we don't even know what product we're building, like that's got a lot of risk to it. The startup that I went to, I had worked at startups for my internships. I had 6 internships in university. So that was really helpful. I
Wow.
hated school, but the internships were like the best. So when I like looked at this startup, they actually reached out to me at the time, and one of the things that really sold me on this startup was he said, we're profitable and we have no investors.
Mm.
So to me, that was a sign like, look, we've literally proven that we have a target audience to sell to, and we are doing it. Because some of those steps are very hard to do, right? You'll hear people saying, like, oh, I have this amazing idea, and then like it doesn't go anywhere. And it's like, yeah, you have to execute on the idea. Or you might have people that are great at selling things, but they don't have the thing to sell. So in this particular case, for me, it was like this feels less risky because this is a business that's already making money. Even though it's small, it's making money. So they can afford to bring us on. So for me, that was a big deal. And that's why I wanted to share that with you. When you're thinking about, say, startup versus a bigger company in terms of stability, it's less about, hey, is this company going to keep me around because it's cushy kind of thing or not? It's really about, do I feel comfortable with the state of the company? I think that's the only thing that you can kind of go investigate, because otherwise, like, you know, again, with big tech and other places, they could be looking at layoffs and stuff like that. As unfortunate as it is, I think that's a reality for a lot of companies. I'll pause there to see if anyone has questions specifically about like this sort of like job security kind of focus before I move on.
Not job security, but I'm more concerned about the amount of tasks that you have to do, the amount of workload you have to do in a big company compared to a small one.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that's coming right up. We can dive
But
right into that next. If no one has questions about the job security, I'm happy to go into that part because that is a big one.
Mhm.
Cool. Okay. I see a thumbs up. One thumbs up is good enough for me to move on. So there's 2. Perfect. Okay. So yeah, with respect to workloads and things like that, um, this is again huge generalization, but what I have found is that within big tech companies, you can find what feels like a startup inside of certain organizations or teams. So just because the company itself is huge, like I've been at Microsoft 4 years now, I learn about a new team just in my part of the organization every single day.
wow.
4 years, and I'm still learning about new teams, right? Like I'm exaggerating a little bit, but it's very much like, hey, like I don't know what this team does. I've never heard of it before. So constantly building this picture of like all these moving parts. And I know for the teams that I've been on, how we operate in terms of like how things flow within our organization. I've been on 2 big platform teams. One was a deployment team. So we were responsible. By the way, I should preface this Office 365 is the organization I'm in. And that is separate from Azure. That's like a big, it's another separate organization. A lot
Okay,
of people
so
think it's the same.
can we just get it on record? It is pronounced Azure.
Azure. Yeah.
All right.
You can call
I
it
keep
Azure. You
That's what I
could.
keep hearing and I don't like it.
Yeah, me too. Mm.
So my entire life before Microsoft, if I had to read that word,
Yeah.
so say I was playing a video game or something and I see that word, I would say uh, Azure. I would
Yeah.
say it that way.
Okay.
And then I started hearing other people say it. Now I just call it Azure. So
Okay, mine was the opposite where I read it as Azure, and then I was like scolding my husband because he said I can't even say it the other way, and I was like, "How dare you?" And
Yeah.
then I told someone in a meeting about it, and they're like, "No, Callie, you're wrong." So we heard it from the source, Microsoft. It is Azure. Okay,
Yeah,
continue.
I hear Azure internally all the time.
Okay.
Again, I would know what people are talking about. So, and you probably heard my Canadian accent come out a little bit too. I might say a boot a little bit, but no judging, right? So, with the organization I'm in, it's Office 365. It's separate from Azure. Very similar types of things going on. There are integrations, but they are separate orgs. And I was on a deployment team prior to where I'm at now, and that's infrastructure type things. But the scale of that, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of machines across the world. We're talking about hundreds of services that we have to deploy. And things move slow compared to a startup. It's actually on purpose as well. And that's because the impact that you could have, say, with bad changes, we need to make sure that we're doing it carefully and that we have the ability to move backwards even faster than we move forwards. So things like deployment might seem like they move like way slower, especially for me coming from a startup. I'm like, hey, like I could push up changes for our desktop product that people have to go download. I could push up 10 changes a day and like not have to worry. And here it's like, hey, before it's out across the entire world, like 100%, it might be weeks, right?
What do
Because
you
they're,
think that does for your development as a software engineer?
yeah, it's a very tricky thing to balance. And so when we talk about workloads and things like that, I would say that, how do I put this? It's like it's in a startup, if you were to think about a startup, there's a lot more like it just feels faster. Like there's constantly, like, we know we have to chip away at this mountain of work, right? And it's like go, go, go all the time as fast as you can. That's what it feels like. You know,
Yeah.
how can we get value to the customers faster and faster? Hey, sorry, we got a deadline. Everyone's got to stay up late, like keep going. And what I feel like for us, again, this is my experience in big tech on a platform team, is that there is a mountain of work still, but we have to chip away at it slower because of the nature of things. So when that happens within the teams, what I find generally is someone will say, "Hey, look, I have a change. It's up for review." Okay. That might mean that they're not able to get any more work done on that until, say, the next day when enough people have checked it out, have their comments. That could be, it could be way faster. Someone might have said, "Yeah, I looked at it. It took me 5 minutes and whatever." But then it has to go through like our build system, which could, depending on how things go, could take the rest of the day for that person. It could mean that once that happens and it's rolling out, they have to monitor those changes over the next week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. So they're not going to be sitting there straight going like, okay, one more machine. Like, how does it look? They have to be doing something else at the same time. So I have to have conversations with everyone on the team and figure out a good balance for them so that they have things they can context switch in between. But I do feel that, like we all know with context switching, that can take away from your effectiveness. So they might say, okay, I have this second work item I can work on. And then they go, oh, I just got some results from one of the deployments, like, and I need to context switch back. So they could be jumping back and forth in the worst case. So um, I'm not a huge fan of that, but I feel like if you don't do it, you're sitting around waiting, and that's even worse.
Totally fair. Do you feel like I feel like in my first job it was more startup environment-y. So I
Mhm.
got to like lead an entire project and I was pushing code all the time. And now it is slower, but I feel like I get so much better reviews and I feel like I'm writing code better. Do you feel like that's something that you see, or is that just like a personal experience that I'm putting on to
No,
things?
I think like I do see that. I think it could also be personal experience as well, right? So I think the fact that we do go slower, like people will be more cautious, right? So now I'm not on deployment. I'm on a team that does routing and firewall and security type
Oh,
services.
cool.
So like we handle like trillions of requests per day for because it's the same platform that we're supporting. It's all of Office 365. So if you think about it, say we do a firewall policy and it's wrong, God forbid, and it
Yeah.
starts blocking traffic, and it's like, okay, well, you go take out everything. Like we have to make sure that we have systems in place that prevent like I talk about things like psychological safety or having environments where you're able to make mistakes and be like, am I not feel like I'm going to lose my job kind of thing. We need to make sure that the infrastructure literally supports that as well as the people. Because if that were the case where you could easily like accidentally press the button that's like block all of the traffic in the world, like we wouldn't want that to happen because that would be very bad. So it's this balance between making ourselves go slower and be effective.
How would you recommend a junior developer? Because that's pretty much, I'm assuming, the audience we have here today. When they get hired, which you all will, how would you help them, or advise them to like get up to speed on some of that infrastructure stuff? Because that's a pretty big mountain to climb when you're like working on something small. How do you learn all of the things that are in place to protect your application?
Yeah, and if you're talking specifically, like once you're in at a given place, like say you're hired, because a lot of the time, like you can try to do as much prep as you want to learn about different technologies and things like that. And I'm not saying that's not going to be useful. So do that, be practicing before you get your job, obviously. But once you're in, you might find that some things feel more proprietary depending where you're at. Microsoft, of course, like, and I would imagine I haven't worked at Amazon, but probably people that have cloud services and things like that, they're using their own stuff because they might as well. But you might work at a company that maybe has some proprietary things. Like I think Google might have a few like build systems or something that are very proprietary. Please don't quote me on that. Replace Google with anything else. There's going to be companies that just have unique things. And I would say you can prep all you want, and it would be great if you do. But once you're in, I think it's the same thing. It's practice. So that means don't be afraid to go do your first pull request. Hopefully, you have someone who's like an onboarding buddy with you, and they can be like, here, like, let's go add a log or a line of logging in. And here, now you can see it actually happening live on machines, right? Like, how do you use the tools to get those logs or see those things happening? Like, just immerse yourself in it because if you shy away from it, you'll notice that you start to feel fearful of what's around you. And if you just keep practicing those things, it will feel overwhelming in the beginning because there is so much going on at a big tech company, right? And it's like everyone kind of goes through that experience where it's like it's overwhelming, but if you hang in there and just try the things out, it'll click pretty fast.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. Um, oh, is there a hand up? Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to ask, what are some good questions to figure out what the culture of the team is? You know, whether you're going to be working a lot of extra hours. I've never seen a job description that says I'm going to work you to death, but just to get a sense of uh, how how the team operates together
Sure.
and what kind of manager you're you're going to start working with.
Yeah, I think you can almost like leverage scenario based interview questions back to the interviewers. Or if you have a say a person that you've reached out to and you developed a connection with, and you can ask questions and they're happy to answer that kind of thing. You could give them scenarios back that kind of test some of these things, right? So you could say like if let's assume that you have a LinkedIn connection. I could be your LinkedIn connection right now, right? So you might ask me like, hey Nick, like let's assume someone on the team like they have a change that goes up and it breaks the service. So for context, we have a bunch of different services. We have a big monolithic service as well as a bunch of microservices. What happens when someone breaks the monolithic service, right? And if my answer was like, well, the VP comes in and they get fired, like you'd be like, well, that sounds pretty terrible, right? But what I would tell you is that we have systems in place to be able to revert that very quickly. And generally, what happens is depending on how late it's caught and the impact, it will go through like a post incident review. Some people might call it a post mortem. So we'd go through a blameless post mortem. We get to share like how we root cause things. Basically, no one gets in trouble for it, but we all get to learn from it. So to your question, though, you can leverage scenario based questions like that to ask people and see how they kind of guide you through their answer.
Like, are you a real developer if you haven't brought down a production server? That's all I'm gonna say,
I haven't yet at Microsoft yet, but they don't let me code too much as a manager now. So
I was so proud of something I built that like at night I was running it and then I went into work the next morning and they're like, Callie, what were you doing last night? I was like, oh, oops.
Yeah. And going to the startup side of things, like that happened a lot because you're moving so fast and it's like, it's just one more change. It's just one more thing. Or, hey, like we have to cut the build right now, but like, hey, like one more feature, one more bug fix. And it's like, well, everyone just tested it. And it's like, don't just one more. And it's like, okay, it should be fine. It's never fine. Um, yeah. So there's the momentum, I would say, at startups is a lot different. I want to be conscious of time too. Do I still have some more time to keep going?
Yeah, you have a half hour. And also you have a question in the chat. Do you want to
Oh,
take that
cool.
one?
Yeah, yeah.
So what is the onboarding processes look like and how are they the same or different between big tech and a startup?
Sure, yeah. I would say, and I should, I've been trying to kind of preface this as I'm going, but to bring it back up, when I'm talking about big tech here, you're going to be hearing like an exaggerated version of it because I'm on one of, or I have been on two of these teams now that feel very much like big tech, a little bit slower versus sort of like the startup culture on a small team within big tech. So I just wanted to share that. So I would say within big tech, the onboarding process it's generally a little bit slower than you might expect at a startup. You're going to get sort of what would be the universal HR onboarding things, like make sure your benefits are set up, like do all these things. That might even take you maybe not solid, but they'd have like a couple of days of onboarding stuff. You go attend like uh, probably mostly virtual stuff these days, but kind of just immerse you in the different things going on in the company. But at the same time, within your team, there's probably some onboarding. So depending on what systems you have to work with, there's a lot of stuff to do with credentials. If you're working at a place that prioritizes security, there's probably a bunch of stuff like that where you're getting your environment set up, your accounts, getting the right authentication and all that. So it feels like there's a lot of slowness in getting set up, getting your dev environment set up. And usually what I've seen is like once you kind of have that going on, and say you're ready to go. So for us, if we're programming in C# and we have Visual Studio up, you finally have that running. This is probably where you'd be working with an onboarding buddy and they would help you kind of get your first commit pushed through so you can see the life cycle of development. And while all of that's happening, there's probably some reviews and discussions that you might be having asynchronously or in team meetings where they're teaching you parts of the system. Um, just to touch on the startup side of that, it's pretty similar, except it's usually condensed. I would say that there's probably a lot fewer systems that you have to go interact with. In terms of being more, I would love to say like at big tech, it's like, oh, like it's the process for onboarding is so perfect. Like, there's been a million people that have done it. It's so easy. No, it's still broken, just like it would be at a startup. So every time people go through onboarding, I'm always saying, hey, please update the documentation if it's not working. So that's a very common thing. But I would say it's probably faster and more condensed at a startup versus big tech. Hopefully that helps. I didn't see if there was more chat questions, but I saw more
I have
hands
a
go up.
question.
Daisy first, then Gloria, and then Jay if we're still taking questions.
Yeah.
So my question is this, right? So I've heard the rumor that startups can be very hostile for junior developers, and obviously everyone is like go with a startup rather than a big company because it's easier to get hired at a startup or in an internship. But I'm trying to figure out, as a junior developer, what is the level of preparedness that we should have and we should expect, that a startup will expect from us, because it's a lot of work in the startup. You might be doing 4 roles, for one role. Yeah, so I'm trying to figure out, as a junior developer, how do you navigate walking into that situation?
Right. No, and that's a really good question. Thank you. I would say, in terms of preparedness, I think one of the number one qualities is being eager because as you said, there's going to be a lot of stuff going on at a startup. You're going to be wearing a lot of hats. This is one of the main things about startups in terms of if it's a good fit for you or not. Generally in big tech, you will find it's not that you're like siloed into something, but like they have a good idea of where you fit into because it's a big moving machine already for the most part, right? At a startup, everyone's like, we don't know what's going on. We just are trying to survive, right? We're trying to make sure we can keep shipping value to the customer so that we can get our, our crawl, walk, run kind of mode going. And yeah, it means that people have to be prepared to be able to do more, and more could look like more variety of things and more could also mean potentially later nights and stuff. Now it's tricky because I can't I can't make a blanket statement and say, hey, if you're working at a startup, you are guaranteed to be working like tons of extra hours. But what I would say is, like, if you don't like the idea of that, if you're like, I have really hard limits around my work-life balance, I would say, like, you want to be very careful about the startup you're going into, because odds are they will have more situations where they're like, look, team, like, we really need your help on this. But preparedness, I would say, being eager and wanting to learn, wanting to try different things, that will be one of the best, you know, set of traits that you could have going into that. Because if you're not that kind of person, it will feel very uncomfortable. I don't know if that answers your question though.
Because I feel like a startup would force me to work at a much faster pace. Like I'm a junior developer, like I know what I'm doing, but there's still so much I need to know. So I'm scared of walking into that and they expect you to already know a bunch of stuff. And it's
I think
like
that's
you get
that's the
bombarded.
difference though. It's I don't think they will expect you to already know. And I think you might surprise yourself for how fast you learn. So when you're put into this environment, again, if you're not open to it, it will feel challenging. So I'm not saying, oh, it's easy. It's not easy, but if you're of the mindset where you're like, hey, like I'm eager, I'm ready to work, and you're just nervous about having the skill set, it'll come very fast because you will be doing all of these things and you'll be forced to learn. Like, it happens on its own.
And just be honest. Like when you get a ticket, be honest about, hey, I think I have a game plan for this. Can I share my game plan with you? And you let me know if I'm on the right track.
Absolutely.
And
Yep.
or like, who can I go to for questions with this ticket? I think I can get this part done, but I'm not so sure about part B, C, and D. Can I follow up with you after I complete part A and you check my work? So like, keep communicating, find a mentor on your team, find a backup mentor. If your mentor is busy, you have someone else for questions. Make sure you communicate how questions should go. But yeah, I mean, you'll learn a ton, and pair program too. Sometimes I get a hard ticket. I'm like, could I do this myself in 10 hours? Sure. Or could I hop in a Zoom room with a senior and get it done in a half hour and then feel no stress? So there are options. Even if you're at a startup and the pace is quick, there's other people that are working there too who know
Absolutely.
what they're doing.
Yep.
All right,
Um,
Gloria, go for it.
Oh, yeah. I was going to ask, I noticed that there have been some positions like at Microsoft where they're encouraging neurodiverse people to apply. And I'm curious what that entails because I haven't seen that many companies hiring with that specifically. And I'm curious like what they do different or, uh, yeah, I'm just
No,
curious.
it's a very good question. I'll be very transparent. I don't have anyone that has been hired into my team or anything like that. There's been mention of like neurodiversity or anyone on my team that's come forward and kind of talked to me about that. But um, if I can generalize answering your question a little bit, because I can't comment specifically on the neurodiversity part, but I do know this is where it gets general, is that Microsoft genuinely is inclusive. I know that from the outside, it's like, oh, it's a big tech company. They're just slapping a label on things so they can get the check mark to say, hey, look, we do good things. But literally from leadership level, like at Satya, through all the leadership that's above me, coming, to my manager through me, it's one of the things that we talk about diversity all of the time. It's literally in the documentation that we use when we go to do rewards and promotions. There's literally sections that we fill out about how people are participating in diversity and inclusion. So I'm being very genuine here. No one's paying me to say this kind of stuff, right? It's literally from top to bottom throughout the entire org. I say org as in company, that diversity is a thing that we focus on. So when it comes to like neurodiversity, I don't know, and this is again more transparency, that I don't know the details on how they're gauging whether or not they have the right amount of people coming in that are neurodiverse. But I do know there are sections of Microsoft, they will hire in people like that have disabilities, and because they're trying to say like, hey, look, you have a whole different set of skills and experiences that are so valuable, and we want to learn from you, we want you to participate. There's areas, especially in like the gaming consoles, right? They'll talk about developing controllers for people that are disabled and things like that. And it's so beneficial to have people coming in with different experiences. So we really lean into this idea that, and I had a conversation with someone about this recently, but we can think about what's an ideal software engineer look like, right? But an ideal team is not just a stacked team of ideal software engineers, because if they were all the same, your team actually wouldn't be very effective. You need to have diversity in the levels, in the backgrounds of people, and you bring all of these unique experiences together to have an effective team. So specifically on the neurodiversity part, though, I can't provide more detail because I don't have that. So I'm sorry.
No worries, that was helpful enough. Yeah, because I was just curious if they were doing it just to check numbers or that type of thing, or if they are actually wanting to include different people. So
It's very
nice.
genuine. I know I don't have like proof to give you, but yeah, like I live it at Microsoft, and yeah, that's why I love when people ask about it, because I'm like, it's true, but like I don't have like a thing to show you.
No,
Awesome.
super
That was a
cool.
great question though, Gloria. All right. Jay,
Yep.
still got your question?
Yeah. I'm just gonna ask. Doing your startup, Nick. How'd you? I know it's probably gonna be very busy. So how'd you manage burnout?
Oh yes.
Because yeah.
And yeah, and I'll clarify too. So not my startup, right? But I did work at a startup.
Hmm.
And one of the reasons why burnout was challenging was it wasn't my startup, but I felt I had such great leadership that it truly felt like it was my company. Like I felt like I had a lot of impact. Anything I did was like I had a lot of autonomy. And what I really struggled with was um, I didn't have any responsibilities outside of work. So I'm currently married. I wasn't married at the time, no girlfriend. I was just a guy that graduated university. Thanks to my internships, basically my debt was paid off. And I was like, I don't know what to do with myself except work. And that's what I did. I did that for like 4 or 5 years straight. So one thing that worked really well for me is that I loved the work I was doing. So, for context, I mentioned digital forensics. We were building software, and a lot of the time it was used to help catch pedophiles. And for us, it was like, what's more rewarding than helping save kids? Like,
Yeah.
truly. So it was so easy to go do work and be like, I'm literally helping save kids. Why would I not do this? The more work I'm doing, my leadership is rewarding me for that. The company's doing better. It's just like this vicious cycle of like, this is so much awesome. But what I didn't realize from a burnout perspective is that I still burnt out, but I didn't notice it. And it was because it was different for me. I had like almost not quite crippling social anxiety, but I
Hmm.
went from being someone who would like party in university to like I didn't like hanging out with my friends if there were other people around because I didn't know how to be normal. I only knew how to work. So it was very challenging, and I do recommend to people that uh, the biggest thing you can do for burnout is like identifying signs of it. Because if you can't recognize the signs, you can't take any action to try and make changes for it. So for me, I ended up getting a dog. It was like a forcing function, like get me outside of the office. And I've done live streams and stuff, and even when I'm about to say, like, I will say that she saved my life, and like it makes me like very emotional because I think without that, I would have gotten to a point where the burnout was so bad where I'm like, oh, it's too late. Like I don't know how to function anymore as a human. So I think awareness is the biggest thing you can do. Set boundaries with yourself. Be clear with your manager, right? So there's going to be times at a startup where they're like, look, we need people to rally. We it's going to be a hard week. Sorry, it's going to be a hard month. Sorry, but I would say if you're finding that it's every week and every month is a hard week and a hard month, you have a question to answer for yourself, like, is this an okay balance for me? And if it's not, then it's not.
think it's good to communicate it with your manager too about what the signs are for you. I specifically cannot ask for a sick day. I don't know what's wrong with me, but I could be throwing up and I still will get so anxious about the idea of asking for a sick day. And so, yeah, when I started at HashiCorp, I was like, heads up, I know we have 10 sick days. I'm not capable of taking any. And one day I was in a meeting and I was like, yeah, I'm not feeling great, but it's okay. My boss was like, close your computer right now. You're taking a sick day. And now he has he's noting it, when, how frequently I need to take time off. So yeah, I think telling your team, telling your manager, how you're feeling and keeping them in the loop is helpful because they can kind of push back and be like, no, you're working too hard.
Yeah. If you have biased, I guess, because I am a manager, but I would say for management traits that I think are good, if you have a good manager, you should be able to have open, honest conversations with them like that. I have the same kind of challenge with we have discretionary time off at Microsoft now in the US. So people will say, hey, Microsoft did that because they know people aren't going to take vacation. I don't know what the motivation was, but I do think that's true. Engineers that are trying to perform very highly generally are I can't take time off. So as a manager, I have to make sure that I'm paying attention to that and being like, hey man, you haven't had a vacation in a while. Get this project wrapped up. It's probably a good opportunity to take some time. I need to be aware of that because it's risk of burnout for sure.
All right, you have a question in the chat. Is it Min? Let me know if I said that wrong.
Yeah. So
Okay,
how do you learn to become a more effective communicator as a junior developer? I found the chat, so I've been trying to watch it.
Guys, he's from Teams, okay?
It's a little different, and it's not in dark mode, so it's hurting my eyes. But no, this is a really good question, and I think it might sound funny, but just like anything, it's practice, right? So I think when it comes to communication, some of the best advice I can give you is try thinking about your audience. So what I mean by that is if you're spending a lot of your time communicating with other engineers directly on your team, it will probably feel a little bit easier as long as you're comfortable reaching out to them and having conversations. But a lot of the time, you'll probably be speaking about code. You'll be speaking about the code that you're probably both touching in different spots or the same spots. So that probably feels a little bit more comfy. But in any role that you're going to be working in, you're basically guaranteed that you're going to be communicating with other roles. At a minimum, your manager, right? So I think the advice I have is consider your audience because your effectiveness in communicating is all about you owning the information and how you share that to your audience in a way that they'll understand it. So for example, on my team, I let people know if they're writing code in C#, I let them know I've been programming in C# for 17 years. I will be coding in C# tonight after I go to the gym. I love to code in C#. So if you want to talk C# with me, by all means. If you want to talk C++, I can walk through code with you, but I can't give you tips and tricks. And then I let them know, by the way, in our one-on-ones, I don't expect you to be you don't have to tell me every little bit of, detail you're doing. And that's general advice I would tell you guys is think of your manager probably doesn't need to know the lines of code you're touching. They might be interested, but odds are they want to know about the impact. They want to hear in general if you're blocked. They want to hear about you should be talking about your career, the direction you're going. So think about the audience, right? If you're working with product managers, they might not know the code. So how do you explain to them what you're working on in detail without going into too much detail? So I think that's what I would recommend is practice that. Think about the audience that you're engaging with.
Worst case scenario, ask them questions.
Yeah.
People love to talk. Unless they don't.
It's a really good point, right? And if you express to someone else, so say you're I'm just going to make up a scenario. You have a product manager on your team and you're I don't know if I'm doing a good job communicating with them. Hypothetically, if that were the scenario, there is absolutely nothing wrong with sending them a message, or if you're in the office and just kind of walking up when they seem free and just being hey, I just wanted to chat and see we have to work and interact together. I want to make sure that when we're working together, I can get you the information you need to make your job easier. I don't think there's a person alive that would say, I don't want you to make my job easier. Like, no, I don't want to communicate better with you. I think people would be very open to trying to at least explore that with you. So if you're ever concerned, just have conversations with people. It seems like there's friction, like, it feels awkward. How do I do it? What's more awkward, doing that once and having a good conversation about it, or putting it off and feeling like every time you go to talk to them, you're like, oh man, I don't know how to talk properly with this person.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so I have a question, but do you have something that you want to get to? Because we have asked you a lot of questions.
No, I would much rather just answer questions. I think the only other thing that I was going to touch on was learning. And I think we kind of talked about like basically going at like super fast speed at a startup, I would say is just one of the best ways to learn. You will learn so much. It's ridiculous. I'm not saying you can't at big tech, because you'll have tons of smart people around you and stuff like that. So many resources you can reach out to, but you're forced to learn fast at a startup. So that was kind of the last part.
Okay. So since most of the people in Coding with Callie's community are looking for their first job, I kind of wanted you to go over big tech versus startup in terms of like, how should you brand yourself if you have a specific one of those that you're looking to get into? How should you apply to jobs? How should you post? What should you study, etc.?
Right. Yeah, and this it's challenging, right? Especially like if I had to give advice even for big tech, the biggest thing going on is the volume of applicants. So I was kind of my camera might not have been working at the time, but when we were chatting maybe before the recording about requirements for degrees and things like that versus boot camps, the comment I made was I think that it was going both ways, and it sounds like that doesn't make sense, but what I mean is that I think there are more people genuinely in the field of software engineering that have not gone to university, college, or done air quotes like traditional approach, and there are more people in boot camp space, self-taught, whatever it happens to be, that's different from the original approach I mentioned. But what's tricky is because there's so much volume. Like literally imagine being in a recruiter's shoes. They open up a position and overnight 2,000 applicants apply. The easiest thing that you can do is just move the bar up. And it sucks because I'm not saying that that's the way that you get the best candidates, but there's just literally no way that you can go through all of them. There's not enough time, there's not enough people to do it. It's inefficient. So instead of like saying I have to go find the best person, if they just move the bar up, what happens is that there's still going to be awesome people. They might lose, maybe the very best person didn't happen to have a degree, but when they move the bar up, they're like, we're still going to be getting awesome candidates and there's fewer to go through. Not saying it's good. I'm just saying that it helps them get the number reduced. So that's why I do think that requirements and things like that, they might seem like they're going up. And it's just because there's so much volume. So it is very competitive. The general advice I would have, this applies to both startups and big tech, is because of volume, is differentiating yourself. So what does that mean? Okay, so and actually I talked with John Vandeveer of Latterly IO. So I'm not sure if you folks know who that is, but he backs everything he says with data points. So I don't have the data on me, but yeah, he has a PhD in economics and he's applying it to like this space for like helping people land coding jobs and stuff.
Oh, I
But
love
one of
that.
the things, yeah, it's great. One of the things that he mentioned to me was in terms of having better success for landing jobs, you want to align to what is most hired for, right? Learn the skill sets that most places are applying for, or my goodness, most places are having job positions for. And that way you are most applicable to most of the jobs. Like it's just like a volume game, right? So he was saying things like React and JavaScript, like learn those. And it's not that you're guaranteed a job, but there are so many places that are like, yeah, you would be applicable here. So that's one way you can do it. But then I would say, great, now you have, all of these people doing the same thing. Try to find ways to differentiate yourself. If you don't have prior work experience, I would say lean into side projects, be able to speak to things that you've built, why you built them a certain way. It's a cool opportunity if you had to rebuild something because you were like, hey, I wanted to make my tech stack way faster. I wanted to explore something. Like those are engineering activities that are real, right? That's a kind of thing that happens in real life where you have to go rebuild or extend things. So find ways to differentiate yourself. I would say, and I'll wrap this part of the question up quickly. I'm sorry, I ramble a lot. But when it's startups versus big tech, I think there's an opportunity where, again, not a rule, but I would say it's startups. It's the interview or the selection process might feel like more intimate. They might give you more take home things that are applicable to their company. The interview style might be less like lead code problems. So there's ways that you can like the interview process itself will feel different, and you're basically guaranteed like lead code, behavioral questions, and system design stuff at big tech. Startups you might not be, and they're looking for more like you might stand out more. So having your portfolio ready, things like that can go a long way for smaller companies. That was very wordy, sorry, but hopefully that helps.
No, it was really great. I want to sometimes keep in context. It's like, because beggars can't be choosers too. So like, this is great to know the difference between startup and big tech. But at the end of the day, it's like, well, what can we get?
It's very like, and it sucks talking about this stuff too, because I'm sitting and I'm currently employed and I don't want to make it seem like, hey, it's impossible, don't try.
Yeah.
Literally, it means that you have to try and try a lot. And I'm sorry to say that, but like volume is on your side, like because everyone else is doing it. It's just, it doesn't feel fair, but it's something that you can play into as well.
Well, if you guys want to learn how to stand out, next Wednesday, I'm interviewing Brooke, who's in this room, by the way, and her LinkedIn really stands out. But Gloria, question.
Yeah, I was curious about remote versus in person, whether you feel like you would learn more being in person if it makes a difference. I went to a boot camp and all of my internships have been remote, just because of COVID and everything. And so I have no way of like telling would it have been very different to be in person versus remote. Do you learn more in person?
Yeah. I would say one of the difficult things to answer this question anecdotally is that I went from in-person startup to remote big tech. So I have kind of two major variables that changed at the exact same time. I will say I like to preface things. Before I answer this, I work remote most of the time. I love working remote. I love the flexibility. I think people should be able to work remote if their job allows for it. Now, do I think that you can learn more in person? I think the answer is yes. When I reflect on my own experiences, even at Microsoft, there are times where I've been in the office. There are more opportunities to have interactions. I think that's the thing that stands out to me. If you have a remote work culture where people are very active in chat rooms and stuff, you might find the exact same thing. So it's hard to make a rule for it. But in person, open office concept, I feel like there's more people accessible all the time. And as a result of that, like whiteboards and things, I feel like that lends itself well to more rapid learning. So that's kind of been my experience though.
Super, that's really helpful because I was thinking like hybrid, remote, and so it sounds like hybrid would be really nice.
Yeah.
Mix. Yeah.
If you're the kind of person that can work remote, you're happy to reach out and connect with people, and like you're not shy to do that, you might totally be fine fully remote. But again, I think that's what it comes down to is the willingness and ability to engage, and other people have to be like that too. So
Yeah. Super. Thank you.
no problem. Hey, Isaac.
Isaac, you ready for your question?
I think
I
he's
think
trying
you're
to unmute.
You'll find it. This is actually the technical interview.
That's right. I passed mine earlier when I took 3 times to get a camera turned on.
He struggled though, and he's a principal engineer, so
Alt A.
all day. You
Yeah,
would know,
that's
Dan.
Can Callie, are you able to unmute
Yeah, I
Isaac?
probably can. You're right. I
You
can
got like
ask to unmute. Did that help?
You should looking for the button.
there it is. Woo. Oh, maybe
Oh.
not.
Oh, we can't really hear you.
Do you want to type your question?
Yeah.
Does anyone have a question in the meantime?
I'll type it. Sorry. Okay.
I have a question. In the meantime, while he's typing it out, do you feel like sometimes they say that if you go to Elite Code and take a look at questions that the companies um, usually ask for, is that really a thing? Like, do people kind of pull
Yeah.
similar questions for like tech interviews? Is that a good strategy?
Yes. And I'll elaborate a little bit. I hate using leet code for interview questions, and I will elaborate on this. I don't think that leet code is a bad thing to do, but I don't think that it's truly representative of what you do as a software engineer day to day. That's been my experience. I have never looked at a leet code problem and said, "Oh, like yeah, I can like that's what I'm doing." Like it has never come up. But the problem, and this is my opinion, but the problem is interviews, especially at big tech, you're basically guaranteed to get something that's like a leet code problem, if not two to three of them across multiple interviews. So the strategy that I recommend there is like be practicing them. Um, I think like even for me applying to Microsoft at the time, I had been programming for 17 years, and I was already I had been an engineering manager my entire professional career because of the startup situation. They just did it early, but I was still programming. When I applied for my principal engineering manager role at Microsoft, I did lead code problems. I was grinding lead code for days because I was like, I know they're going to ask me this, and I don't care how long I've been programming for. I'm not going to be able to do well on these questions unless I practice them. So I think that the strategy is practice them.
Super.
Cool. Dan, I see your hand up, but I see Isaac's question in the chat, and I want to do Isaac right on his question.
Also,
uh,
it is 9 p.m. Are you okay to stay, Nick? I don't want
I
to.
am. I'm sorry for going over.
Oh, I don't
I'm
care. This is
okay.
my life. Who else would I hang out with?
No, I don't mind. I apologize for the time lapse though. So my company's based in Cincinnati, so they have a strong junior dev pipeline of people with CS degrees. Awesome. How would you get into the junior pipelines for big tech or startups? Couple ways. So I have my bias here is that when I was in university, my program was a forced co-op program. So it meant that every 4 months I was put into an internship. I had to be because if I wasn't, then um, I don't proceed. So the structure of the program itself was internships every 4 months. So what I would say is the big tech companies in particular, guaranteed if you go on their careers page, they'll have internship programs, and a lot of them have different structures for internship programs as well. At Microsoft, there's a handful of different ones. They have like ones starting as I still don't know the US terminology for like high school and stuff, but I think as late as like just graduating high school,
Senior.
sorry, as senior, yeah. So they like basically your last year of high school or whatever, they'll take on like some type of intern, and it might be like you're just starting college or university. Even through university, they'll take them on into different programs. So different places have different programs. Research them, reach out to the people to get more information, like immerse yourself in it so that you can get in touch. Startups are different because a lot of the time, I shouldn't say a lot because I don't have stats on that, but I would say that startups might go one of two ways. One way is that they're like, we can't take the risk on interns because like that doesn't seem like a safe strategy for us. We need to find the rock star senior engineer that's going to build everything and do it right. So it's low risk. Spoiler alert, that doesn't really de-risk you. And then the other way is that startups will go, hey, we can't afford the rock star senior, but we can afford 10 co-ops or interns. So we'll go get 10 interns. They're going to build everything for us. Spoiler alert, that might not also work either. So somewhere in the middle, they might have some offering. And I would reach out to the companies. Literally, if they're small companies, you can get in touch with the person at the top, potentially on LinkedIn. Send them a message. Don't be pushy about it. Don't say, hey, like, hire me. Say, like, hey, I'm interested in the company, wanted to learn more. You start that networking off without being like, give me the job. Because that's not a great strategy. But yeah, you can definitely reach out to smaller companies and see.
Awesome. All right, I'm gonna lock it down, Dan, and then Jay, and then we're gonna call it and let Nick go to work out.
So my
Cool.
question was referring to when you were talking about leak code. How, as someone who's come from both big tech and a startup, how often would you say you use big O notation when you're creating like database or creating data structures and your design? When you're brainstorming stuff, do you guys think of this a lot? Like when you're first coming up with your designs?
Great question. I've been programming for 21 years and I've never used Big O in my entire career. Like officially used Big O. The concept of like, do I know that this data structure is more performant? Yes. I have never used Big O notation officially at work. There are situations when optimizing things, we might say, hey, look, there's a loop and another loop inside of it. That's probably not a good thing. Can we do better? But there's at the rate that we find that we're building stuff, I would say like if you're measuring performance as you go and you're not just like totally negligent about it, you can do some things that are okay enough. And then you can build on top of that and refine them. You might change your algorithm. You have your integration tests and stuff in place, and you go, great, like I know it works. Like, let me go make it faster if that's a requirement. So yeah, I'm being totally transparent. Like I know what big O notation is. I've never used it officially, but if someone said, hey, I'm going to go add a million things into this list so that I can go look them up one by one, I would say, hey, why don't you use a dictionary? Like that's really the extent of it. There are like within my team, there is really complex caching because when we're routing trillions of requests, we have to make sure that we're doing a good job caching, high cache rates, and being as memory efficient as possible. So that's a spot where it's like pretty specific, where I would say different strategies and things like that would come up where people want to do some analysis, but that's like it's pretty specific, right? It's not coming up all the time. That's why when people talk about lead code, I'm like, it just the concept's sure, but it just doesn't translate directly.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
No problem.
All right, Jay, close us
All right.
out.
All right. Hope you got those protein shakes ready for the gym, Nick. I certainly have a crazy idea. So I found out that there are this pool of internship that is only available to college student, and if I'm and I gra unfortunately I graduated and I don't really know about this. Otherwise, I would have postponed my graduation. So my crazy idea is uh what if I join like a master degree and then for a semester and then I drop out, but in the meantime I keep applying for those internship. What do you think, Nick?
I don't know. I do not work on the recruiting side.
Yeah.
It might work, but there might also be a requirement too that like you need to be in good standing with your schooling. And I don't know the
Yeah.
details on that. In general, if I could offer advice, I would say that there are ways to be very successful at things without trying to game things either. So if I could give you that advice, that would be my advice is you could probably do it and do well. You can get into where you want to get to with the effort. And you don't have to game anything. I think you can do it.
Cool. And also, do you know do you have any advice on actually starting a startup?
It's hard. So I'll keep this one super brief. On the
Yeah.
side, for the past couple of years, I was trying to build a nutrition platform, and I love to code, so I was coding tons of stuff. It's actually my fourth year design project from university too many years ago now. I'm not going to date myself. I'm losing all my hair and I have white in my beard, so I'm getting old. But I tried building more of this on the side, and I was like, I'm an expert user of this. Like I would use this. I would pay for this. And I was building it with a former colleague who is also in the same situation. He was like, this is something I would use. And we built software. It was totally functional. And we realized we cannot sell. We're terrible. We can't talk to people. So we
What
couldn't
app
do it.
was it again?
What it was called Meal Coach. And so I built this thing over a couple of years. Like I said, fully functional, but we cannot sell. Like it was terrible. And I make when I make my YouTube videos every week, I make a vlog. And for like basically all 52 weeks of last year is the progression of me being like, I'm gonna finally talk to someone about trying to buy this.
Yeah.
No, like it was awful. I had a professional bodybuilder at my gym who was willing to, towards the end of the lifetime of this, he was like, I'll use it, I'll onboard my clients to it. And by that time, we had spent so much time that there were competitors
Oh
that had
no.
everything
Oh,
we wanted to
no.
build. They had investment, and we were like, see, like we're dumb.
No, you didn't make
Aw.
it free so that people can access it
Oh,
and then
yeah,
you
it
run
was
ads?
free. It was
Oh.
literally free. We
Oh.
couldn't even give it away.
It's hard to get users. It really is.
Yeah.
Oh, I
So
see.
if you're going to do a startup, I would say make sure that you have a bunch of people who are already screaming at you that they have a problem, and then you go fix that.
And then go hire someone who can sell things.
That's right, because it's not me.
Cool, cool, awesome ideas. Thank you
All
so much,
right.
Nick.
Well, Nick, this was so good. Thank you so much for coming on. Do you have anything that you want to plug? You can plug your exercise, your nutrition app if you
No,
want.
that's unfortunately long gone. It's yeah, still close to home. No,
All
no, I
right.
wanted to say thank you so much. I post a lot on LinkedIn, so you can find me there. I brand myself as dev leader because I tried starting this about 11 years ago now. When I started doing management, I wanted to help other managers get into the space where they're like, hey, I code all the time. Since then, I've kind of transitioned to general software engineering advice, C# if you like programming in C#. So I make a lot of YouTube videos, and you can check me out there. Send me messages if you want me to try and help you with something. I'm happy to try and help if I have time. So thank you so much.
I love it. Thank you. And plugging my own stuff now. Make sure you guys sign up, A, Nick, to be a mentor, and B, everybody else to be mentees for our first Coding with Callie mentorship fundraising event. It's going to be in July. It'll be, you get 2 sessions with a mentor, from code reviews to career coaching to tutoring, coffee chats, the whole thing. And it raises money for the Junior Devs Job Fund. So then I can hire you guys to do some jobs or find people to pay you to do some work. All right. Sounds good. I will see everybody next week. Thanks again, Nick.
Thank you so much. Take care.